today, Lesson 33. Back in Lesson 20, you were introduced to the triplet, 3 notes played in the time of 2. All the triplets you met then were quaver triplets, 3 quavers played in the time of 2 normal quavers or 1 crotchet. But triplets don't have to be quavers. They can be crotchets or semiquavers instead, as you can see on the first page of your booklet for this lesson, page 385. Crotchet triplets are very tricky to play in 2/4 or 4/4 time because they run right across the beat. If the first note of the triplet is played on the beat, then the second comes just before the next beat, and the third note just after it. The only way to count these triplets, so you get the rhythm exactly right, is to imagine them as a series of tied quaver triplets. Look at example A on page 385. Each pair of tied quaver triplets equals 1 crotchet triplet. Try counting these triplets as you listen to example A on the cassette now. Example B has exactly the same notes for the right hand, but this time they're written as crotchet triplets. The left hand provides a steady crotchet beat. You'll probably find it very difficult at first to play the 2 hands together. But if you count the rhythm for the right hand as if it was a series of quaver triplets, just like you did in example A, then you should gradually begin to get the timing right. This is what it should sound like. Fortunately, you don't very often have to perform this rather difficult trick of playing 3 against 2. It only crops up occasionally, although, of course, you need to be prepared for it when it does. Semiquaver triplets create some very characteristic rhythmic effects in music with a basic crotchet beat, in 4/4 time, for instance. Let's hear how it sounds with a semiquaver triplet on the upbeat, in the example at the bottom of page 385. Compare that with the semiquaver triplet on the downbeat. And of course you can have triplets on both up and down beats. Quintuplets work on the same principle as triplets, but instead of 3 notes in the time of 2, you get 5 notes in the time of 4. So a quintuplet in semiquavers equals 4 normal semiquavers or 1 crotchet. You can recognize a quintuplet by the figure 5 written beneath the group of notes. Exercise 332 is designed to let you practice playing quintuplets. Only the first note of each group of 5 should be stressed or accented. There shouldn't be any secondary stress on any of the other 4 notes. Some of the fingering in the right-hand part of this exercise is quite complicated, so watch out for it. And don't forget the F-sharp key signature. The word leggero, L-E-G-G-E-R-O, at the start of the music, means light. And legato, you already know, means smooth, so the exercise is to be played smoothly and evenly with a light touch. Exercise 332. can also try playing exercise 332 with a combination of 2 semiquavers and a semiquaver triplet, instead of the quintuplet, as suggested at the bottom of page 387. Then you get a stress both on the first of the 2 semiquavers and on the first note of the semiquaver triplet, like this. Our solo keyboard work for this lesson is another piece by Clementi, an Allegro. It's in 3/8 time, so there are 3 quaver beats to the bar. The Allegro is quite straightforward, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll find it very easy. Watch especially the sequences of 1-4-2-3 fingering in the right hand. For instance, in the second and third bars of the second page, page 389. You may find it takes some careful practice to avoid stumbling here. Notice the long crescendo from pianissimo at the start of the second to last line of the music to forte at the end of the piece. This is quite a dramatic effect, and you should make the most of it. At the end of the second to last line, by the way, you play an A in the right hand with your 5th finger. Then the next note you play with your right hand, the first note of the last line of music, is the same A, but this time played with your thumb, so that you can continue on up the keyboard. You'll have to practice carefully to manage this jump from the 5th finger to the thumb on the same note. Finally, before we hear the Allegro, just a word about the rests. Throughout the piece, the rests in the left hand, which last a whole bar, are written as semi-breve rests, that is, equivalent to 4 crotchets. Yet the music is in 3/8, 3 quavers to a bar. Well, this isn't a mistake or a misprint. It's just an established convention in music that when you have a silence for a whole bar, you can write in a semi-breve rest, whatever the time signature. So in this case, a semi-breve rest stands for 3 quavers silence. Now let's listen to the Allegro by Clementi. Our dance rhythms for this lesson have a Latin American flavour. Let's start by looking at some rhythmic patterns at the top of page 390. Some variation on the pattern semiquaver, quaver, semiquaver, or quaver, crotchet, quaver, is the basis of many Latin American dances. Here's the rhythm in example A. Example B has the last semiquaver of one group tied to the first semiquaver of the next. In example C, the first semiquaver of each group is replaced by a rest. Try tapping out these rhythms for yourself, using your left hand or your foot to provide the steady metronome beat. It's a good preparation for playing the dances we're going to move on to now. The habanara is a dance from Cuba that was very enthusiastically taken up by the Spanish. Let's hear the basic rhythm, with first the root note as the bass note, then the chord again, and finally the 5th as the bass note. As we've said before, in the case of a 7th chord, the sequence of bass notes usually reverses itself. So you get 5th, chord, chord, root note. Here's example A at the bottom of page 390. You can play a simplified version of the left-hand part if you prefer, splitting up the two notes of the chord as shown at the top of page 391. Or you can try a very impressive but somewhat more difficult version with the left-hand notes spread out over more than an octave. This involves moving your left hand rapidly up and down the keyboard. A great deal of practice is needed to do this accurately. If your keyboard instrument is a piano, use the sustaining pedal to smooth over the break as you jump from the bass note up to the chord. Finally, here's a version with the two hands playing the accompaniment. The bass notes are in the left hand and the chords in the right. The tango is another famous Latin American dance. The most striking feature of its rhythm is the legato movement from the bass note at the end of one bar to the bass note at the start of the next. Listen. Let's hear example B. The left-hand part in example B is far from easy, and you may prefer to invent a slightly less difficult version for yourself. Whatever left-hand accompaniment you play, you must decide on the most comfortable fingering for the notes, and then stick to it through all your practice. In this sort of music, it's absolutely essential to be able to play the left-hand rhythmic accompaniment automatically, virtually in your sleep. Otherwise, once you try to play the right-hand part as well, you'll find that the rhythm falls to pieces. So always concentrate on mastering the left-hand part first, before you put the two hands together. To finish off our look at the tango, here's a version with both hands playing the accompaniment, at the bottom of page 391. The left hand still does the lion's share of the work. The Beguine is slightly different in that its rhythm is based on the quaver-crotchet-quaver pattern. Here's how it goes. When you come to try example C, it might be a good idea at first to play all the bass notes as the root note, rather than alternating between the root note and the fifth. You'll find this makes it a bit easier to manage. Example C. In our second interpretation of this Beguine, we've transferred the chords to the right hand. This makes the left hand part a lot more simple, but of course the right hand becomes a touch more difficult. When you've thoroughly practiced all these dance rhythms, why not try making up a habanara, a tango, or a beguine for yourself? Either use a sequence of chords we've given you, or invent one of your own. And once you're sure of the rhythmic accompaniment, make up a tune to go with it. This can be great fun, and there are no penalties if you don't succeed at first. You can always try again. On page 393 of your booklet, we've listed the minor seventh chords for you. They're all shown in the root position and the three possible inversions. The main purpose of this summary table is to give you something to refer back to in future if you ever forget one of the chords. But it's well worth playing through them now to familiarize yourself with them more thoroughly. This lesson, there are two pieces with backing orchestra for you to play: Super Tango and Play the Beguine. We'll listen to Super Tango first. Here it is with keyboard and backing. The main problem in playing this piece is obviously the heavily syncopated rhythm. There's a natural tendency to start playing notes on the beat rather than between the beats. But if you get into the feel of the music, you may find it's not as tricky as all that after all. When you do run into difficulties, careful counting should help you get back to the right rhythm again. The left-hand part, in the last line of the first page and the first line of the second page, has some quite awkward jumps down the keyboard to reach the lowest bass notes. At first, you may find you tend to hit the wrong note, just missing the one you want. There's a very simple and effective answer to this problem: slow practice. For instance, in the third bar on page 395, practice over and over again the jump from the G and D chord down to the bottom D. Playing so slowly, you're sure to get it right every time. Then, when you speed up, you'll find that you hit the D automatically, just as you want to. You'll have noticed that there are two repeated sections. That is, the first 4 bars and the 4-bar section in the middle of the second page. Make sure you don't forget the B-flat key signature, and read the accidentals carefully. When you've practiced Super Tango enough at slow speed, you'll be ready to play along with the backing, which we're going to hear now. For Play the Beguine, we've only written out the melody, leaving you to make up the rhythmic accompaniment. You have to keep the characteristic Beguine rhythm going throughout, except in the 8th bar where you play 2 minim chords. You'll need to be careful to read the chord names accurately. There's both an A7 and an A minor 7, for example. You mustn't get them confused. The only new chord is the D-flat diminished chord, D-flat, E, G and B-flat. Some of the chords are marked to be played with a particular bass note. At the start of the 4th line, for instance, there's a D minor chord marked to be played with B as the bass note. Of course, B isn't normally part of the D minor chord at all, so this creates a more complicated harmony than you're used to. The right-hand part is quite easy to play. You'll notice the crotchet triplets that crop up several times. It's best to work on the 2 hands completely separately in this Beguine until quite an advanced stage. Try playing along with the backing with the right hand alone and then with the left hand alone, before you attempt to put the 2 hands together. So now here's Play the Beguine with keyboard and backing. Finally, here's the backing only.